Once again, you're watching the Boards of Bio Briefings. Your host, Dr. Rafi, right here on Think Tech Hawaii Television. And you often know or ask or don't ask, but I'll tell you anyway. My tagline is always, you're hot, we are not. Why do I say that? Because there are only two important things on Think Tech Hawaii. One of those things is we have hot listeners, hot viewers, and hot news. Consequently, the hosts are just a facilitating factor on our shows. And I want to start you off today with some hot news that just appeared this past week. One of my sources is the New York Times, and the headline that caught my attention was obesity rate for young children plummets 43% in a decade. And let me just get you on the first two paragraphs. Forgive me, because I normally do not like to read articles. You can read those yourselves. But let me read the first two paragraphs of this amazing news. Federal authorities on Tuesday reported 43% drop in the obesity rate among 2 to 5-year-old children over the past decade. The first broad decline in an epidemic that is often leading to lifelong struggles with weight and higher risks for cancer, heart disease, and stroke. And the drop emerged from a major federal health survey that experts say is the gold standard for evidence on what Americans weigh. So, why do I mention this? And what are we talking about today? We're going to be talking about obesity reduction. We're going to be talking about why is it so difficult to cope with the problems of obesity that leads inevitably as you get older to all types of issues in chronic illness, inflammatory diseases, diabetes, early death, and decrease in longevity. That's why I participated in a major study just about 2.5, 3 years ago. And I'm going to talk a bit about it because it happened right here in Hawaii. It was part of a larger initiative. Some of you are familiar with this initiative. It was heralded in the national press in the United States and perhaps even internationally. It was the Michelle Obama Obesity Reduction Initiative. So, what's this all about? Why is obesity so important? Well, you just heard my introduction. What will happen as we see the population, the current seniors, and the millennials, and the generations after them that keep eating at the same levels they've been used to during the past 20, 30 years, and increasingly having to cope with issues such as cholesterol, such as the inability of their pancreas to cope with the insulin that the body needs to break down sugars and carbohydrates. And what about all the ancillary and other issues that come with a overweight society? Not to speak of the illnesses that I just spoke up and the needs for increasingly larger and larger facilities with more and more beds for hospitalizing the chronically ill, the geriatric patients, the people with complications, the surgeries, the doctors. Where's this all going to come from? Not to speak of, obviously, the financial support mechanisms that societies need to cope with these issues. We have just been through a major introduction of a new healthcare system in America, and aside from the political issues that attend that introduction, people don't realize that this is just the small symptom. This is not even the full-blown event. So when I heard about the Michelle Obama initiative, I was actually approached by the good friend of mine, Dr. Lauren Pang, who is the district medical officer on Maui, and asked if I would participate in this applied research study. This was not a study that was designed to theoretically come up with solutions, come up with causation. Many of the things that this study supported were actually answers to how can we cope on the ground when we know what the problem is. What solutions can be coming up from the ground as opposed to parachuted down from above. And so this was not, in a sense, a purely scientific research. This was what we call applied research in the field, coming up with solutions that will work immediately. And we know how much people want answers quickly. So the first thing we decided to find out was, what would it take to change the behavior of the population in terms of their eating and exercise? Now, I know that I'm mentioning two very sensitive issues. One of them is exercise. I know that in America, on New Year's Eve or perhaps the morning after, people make resolution. We're going to do this. We're going to exercise. We're going to walk. We're going to jump. We're going to do hula hoops. We're going to jump rope. We're going to enter a gym. We're going to do samba or mama. I even don't know all the names of the programs. They have all these programs that are attached to music or hip hop or whatever, just to get you moving. And without passing judgment, without saying that, that one program is better than the next. What we do know, what do we know? Well, we know that many people sign up after New Year's Eve when they feel especially engorged with food and barely moving, and they feel guilty about having overeaten during the holiday periods between Thanksgiving and New Year's Day, that they have to do something. And that something usually has to do with signing up perhaps for gym memberships. And many industries in America, if not the world, are geared to these weaknesses at these particular times, get people to do something, buy something, and we know that we want instant answers. So we're always looking for the next, quote, app to answer the problems that we have. And so the question is, how are we going to deal with overweight? How are we going to deal, whether it's through exercise or reducing our intake or reducing the type of foods we eat or taking pills? What is it? What are we going to do? And so we decided to try to look at the issue on its most simplistic level. Whether it would involve one particular exercise didn't interest us at that time. But first of all, we wanted to find out what would it take to get people to change their behavior. Now, we know that traditionally, when we want to change behavior of people, we have to incentivize them. If we want doctors to see more patients, what can we do? Well, we can lower their rate of payment, and so they have to see more people to make the same type amount of income that they did before. Or if we pay them more to spend more time with the patient, obviously we would have to provide more physicians. I just want you to think about some of these things that are having an effect on this epidemic. But we decided that incentivizing the professionals who deal with illness is not necessarily part of the solution. They've tried incentivizing people with different types of programs. Many professionals are paid, especially when they are under insurance payments, are paid by a disease or are paid by a procedure, whether it's a surgical procedure, or they are paid by the types of facilities they use, and so on. But we wanted to even do something pre-hospitalization, pre-institutionalization, pre-going some program. What could we possibly do that would incentivize people to do that one of the two things that we talked about? Either lose weight or participate in exercise or change their eating behavior. So we decided to put it to the most knowledgeable source of behavior. And who do you think that might be? Well, the most knowledgeable source of behavior is the person themselves. Think of yourself. When you are asked to do something in a free society, you have to decide, am I going to comply? Is it in my interest? What will it take? What is the cost of not affecting change? What is the cost of not participating? So you see, it's not so simple. It gets pretty complex. So I decided to use something that I had used previously in group dynamics, and that's called a policy formulation procedure. No, it doesn't hurt. No injections, no pain. All it involves is participation. So what is this policy formulation? Well, something developed by the Rand Corporation back in the 1950s their first attempt at getting consensus, at developing policy based on input from various people, perhaps with different backgrounds. Some of them agreeing with what the proposition on the table was, and some of them not. How do you get consensus? Very important. How do you get consensus in 300 million people? How do you get consensus in populations like in Hawaii, where we have one of the highest causes and affliction of diabetes and other diseases that are attributable to obesity or improper diet? How do you get everybody to agree what to do? So we decided to try a new version of what the Rand Corporation had tried in the 1950s, another policy formulation. If we could get people from the targeted population, I'll be quite frank here, we were looking specifically at a very small but very important subgroup of the American population, Native Hawaiians. And Native Hawaiians, like other Native groups, have traditions, whether it's eating or behavior, whether it's having been subjugated in the past, whether having been conquered, whether they were part of a dominant population prior to coming into the 20th century, had all had fairly traditional lifestyle. Prescribed behavior was pretty much accepted from generation to generation. The governance, the social behavior, the eating behavior, the food gathering behavior, food preparation, all these have been prescribed over many generations, but obviously disrupted as many Native Native groups around the world through various processes of colonialism. And I don't want to get into the political aspects of it, but it's a given that many changes had taken place that are quite different from the current behavior and socio-biological processes that are present in the indigenous population of Hawaii. And again, Hawaii is a really good sample from which we can perhaps extrapolate and draw conclusions to other native indigenous groups, whether it's the Maoris, other Polynesian groups, whether it's Melanesians, Micronesians, Native Alaskans, or Native American Indians, and so on. So very, very important. How are we going to get consensus? How are we going to find out what will motivate the most at-risk population in Hawaii to change their behavior? So what do you think? What do you think it took? Well, I decided to try something called the nominal group technique. The nominal group technique is different from different policy-making behavior and procedures in that even when you're trying to get consensus on an issue between different people, you do not expose the people themselves to any negative behavior or to negative aspersions. Remember, when we're sitting down with a group, how many of you have ever sat down at a conference and tried to come up with a response to a question, and you immediately maybe get intimidated by the person who's the tallest, perhaps the biggest, perhaps the richest, perhaps the most powerful, perhaps the person with the most important task or the most power in the room? Well, that was one of the drawbacks of the original Delphi technique. And the nominal group technique, which came later, simply lets people go through iteration. It allows people to put their opinions down on paper and then anonymously submit them to a moderator. So they usually imagine there are 5 to 8 people in a group. The moderator posts a question, which is the question that the group is going to decide. What, for instance, in our group, that we did this over several iterations, meaning several times we went through the process with the same group of people. We trained native populations to use the technique on other people from the same group, so there would be no intimidation or appearance of coercion. And what they did was try to come up with a solution to the question, what would it take to get you to change your behavior in exercise behavior or in eating behavior? So that was, in essence, the question on the table. It was not easy. These sessions took anywhere between 3 and 4 hours. Obviously, we took some breaks. But each time we would pose the question, we had one moderator. He would post or she would post a question on the board, and then people had a chance to put down an answer to the question. The question was often phrased in different aspects of the same policy that we wanted to come up with. And we'd go around and around until we discussed. Every time we went through a round, or what's called an iteration, we would put down on the board the responses that people had given to what they think would be the incentives necessary to get them to change their behavior. And then they would vote on it. And then we would take the top 5 or 6 responses and keep going, keep focusing on them until we could come up with perhaps 2, 3, or even 5 major policy solutions to this particular questions. So when we tried to find out what it would take to get people to change behavior with regard to eating and with regard to exercise, what do you think they came up with? You can't guess? I'm sure as you're watching this, I'm sure you already in your mind have an answer. Well, if you thought that money was number one, you would not be far off. And almost everything was focused around financial incentives. Do you find this strange? Not strange at all. Why is it not strange? Because money is a very important component in most incentives that we are offered in our daily life, whether that's on apps on iPhone, or whether it's on television, or whether it's promoters selling something on the telephone, or whether it's a door-to-door salesman from 40 years ago selling encyclopedias. What are the incentives? Usually came down to money. So you say, so why not give people money? Wouldn't it be better to give people $50 bonuses every time they lost 10 pounds? Or every time they lost 2 pounds? What is wrong with that? What was primarily wrong was that you have to keep giving the incentives. Otherwise, people stop their behavior and go back to what we call their comfort level. So this was the first interesting outcomes about trying to query Native Hawaiians on their eating behavior and solutions to their perhaps lack of exercise. But we are not ready to give up on the incentives part of it, so we put that aside, and we decided that we are going next go and look at meaningful exercise. What did this mean? Perhaps part of the problem was that meaningful exercise meant different things to different people. Now, often in America and in other Western cultures, people want to find the easiest way of doing things. And what's the easiest way? To do as little as possible. So we're often seduced by, you don't need to do very much exercise. All you have to do is walk a block or climb up a flight of stairs once or twice a day. Now, of course, there is some beneficial effect to that, depending upon, again, your age group or whatever possible underlying afflictions you may have. But that's really not going to make a big difference. If you're looking at extending your longevity anywhere between 2 to 10 years, and you're a heavy smoker or improper eating carbohydrates, lots of starches, suffering from overweight, and so on, all which have a higher tendency towards inflammatory diseases, the occurrence of obesity-related diseases, the occurrence of cardiac conditions, and so on, you are going to not to be affected much by just a mild exercise, just walking down the street, just walking to the how you call it, the bancomat, the machine where you get the money from. I can't. The ATC, is it? Oh well, I know what you know what I mean. You know where you get the one of our big journeys in the 21st century is that we walk ATM. I'm sorry, it's the ATM. Sometimes get a little translational problems here. Okay, so we decided that meaningful exercise, perhaps because I'm an addicted outrigger canoe paddler, to me it meant, why don't we take something from traditional Native Hawaiian culture? The very same canoes that they came to America on, or rather more accurately to Hawaii on, and use that to fill in the gap on the exercise that is lacking for many people. And many people said, no, this doesn't make sense. I said, why doesn't it make sense? Because most Hawaiians do not paddle. In fact, those canoes that are active in Hawaii, the outrigger canoes, are mostly involved in racing activities. And the people who paddle in them, they're already fit. So how could we get them to participate in this activity with the attempt to get them to be fit? Because it's almost a unanswerable question. It's a chicken before the egg type of situation. If you have to be fit to paddle in an outrigger canoe club, how are you going to get fit? How are you going to be accepted? Why would you join if you're already fit? And on and on and on. So I decided that what was the reason that many Hawaiians don't go in the canoes? And obviously, one of the issues was that they couldn't get in the canoes because perhaps they already had a larger girth and permitted to get in the canoes. So I decided to research this further and found out that the average canoes was anywhere between 14 to 18 inches wide at the seats. So why not make wider canoes? It seemed to me a very natural type of solution. Well, I was told that this was not in keeping with the rules of the racing, or the Outrigger Canoe Racing Association. You can't have wide-body canoes because they don't conform to the sizes. This is just like almost any other sport. In fact, it is like every other sport. There are rules and there are standards, and this doesn't fit. So I said, why not focus on using the canoes as the exercise and get the participatory feeling, get a sense of community? Because one of the important issues in the survival of indigenous people everywhere is having a sense of community. So why not build the community back again around the canoe? Well, could that possibly work? Apparently the Centers for Disease Control, in their wisdom, decided to allow me some funds to build 3 wide-body canoes that I designed together with the owner of Bradley, Sonny Bradley, probably the foremost canoe builder in Hawaii. He lives in Kaneohe, on the other side of the island. And with his help and with his support, we built 3 wide-body canoes and decided this was the answer. But this was just the beginning of the process. What else did we do? Well, we decided also that we were going to change the eating behavior. Aside from exercise, the eating behavior was very important. How would we go about that? Well, I contacted several supporting organizations. That time, I lived on Maui, and I involved the Maui Culinary Academy of the University of Hawaii and Maui College, and they said that they would provide support also, not only in terms of some of their students learning to prepare healthy foods and coming up with menus, but also train the community, use the Culinary Academy as a site for training locals who live on Maui, who wanted to learn how to prepare foods in a way that is healthier, that is more in keeping with the goals of healthy behavior. Not only that, we got also 2 organizations. One of them was the Whole Foods Corporation that provided us with instructors who came on site and trained people gratis they instruct them in preparation, using more local greens, using more vegetables, using more proteins. And so that was the contribution of Whole Foods. Also Down to Earth, another health-oriented food store on Maui and on Oahu, provided also support and orchestrated some of our introductory activities. But we'll tell you a little bit more about this particular program, how it worked, what happened after we return.
Castle and Cook, Hawaii. Investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state. Collateral Analytics, empowering the real estate industry to make better informed property investment decisions. The Foreign Trade Zone, bringing the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone programs to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. Galen Ho, a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company. Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island. The Hawaii Energy Policy Forum, incorporating diverse perspectives to design a flexible and forward-looking energy strategy. Hawaii Energy, the state's energy and efficiency program created to help Hawaii's residents and businesses adopt a clean energy lifestyle. Hawaii Gas, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future. Hawaii Pacific Health, bringing technology and teamwork together to transform healthcare in Hawaii. The High Tech Development Corporation, attached to DBED, is the state's leading technology agency. The Scheidler Family Foundation, supporting educational, cultural, and charitable organizations, including Think Tank.
Once again, you're watching Boritzer's Bio Briefings. We are talking about the Centers for Disease Control initiative that I put into play with the Canoe Club, the Native Hawaiian population, and the University of Hawaii Maui College 2 years ago, and just giving you a report on what things are possible. And we were talking about the fact that first we tried to find out what incentives it would take. And so I told you that the incentives that we came up with to change people's behavior in terms of eating and in terms of exercise really didn't surprise us. Even when anonymity was afforded to the participants in these discussions, people wanted cash, people wanted club memberships in health clubs. One of the things that we find very ironic is that many people know that participating in a health club is a very perhaps a temporary type of behavior. When people feel guilty, they sign up for memberships, and then in fact the health clubs often base their income and forecasting of their profits on the fact that most people do not use their memberships. Because if all the people who signed up initially for memberships want to use it at the same time, they would not have the space. So it's based on the fact that there's a high dropout rate. So this is hardly an incentive to get you to do things by yourself. Now, one of the big questions with all this exercise is, do you really need a club? I mean, if the basic cardiac exercise of walking or running or going up and down stairs, you don't need more than that, because the idea of the exercise is, aside from wanting to build up perhaps muscular mass over on your shoulders or arms or legs or whatever, it's basically about your cardio rate. You want to get your heart working. You want to reduce the amount of fat you're carrying. You want to reduce the amount of sugar you're intaking. So these are all secondary issues. Should you join a club? What incentives will you give? And really the incentives are rather that you're going to live a long, healthy life, a quality life, instead of being attached to tubes and perhaps worrying about being immobile, or perhaps falling down a step because you're overweight and perhaps your bones can't support the rest of your body. So we are talking about the canoes, and what I want you to do is take a look at a brief video about how we started this program.
Okay, you got everybody?
Yeah,
okay.
We got everybody. Okay, let's do a tour. This is an attempt to make exercise and fun synonymous. My name is Professor Rafi Boritzer. We are here on Sugar Beach. We are at the Maui Canoe Club, which is on the south side of the island. Today we are going to take for the first time the wide body canoe that I designed about a year ago, specifically to be used for obesity reduction and prevention of chronic illness. I know it's a little bit stretch of the imagination, but we have a theory that if people exercise in something that they like to do, especially in Hawaii, where many of the Hawaiians simply do not fit in the canoes that they came here 1,000 years ago. We want to recreate the times that they can get back in the canoes, paddle, and keep in the shape that they were able to survive all these years on these islands. Hawaii is one of the highest populations of diabetes-prone and diabetes-inflicted populations. And we're trying to reduce that through exercise. Some imagination and support from people who never thought that this could be a weight reduction tool. A grant from the Centers for Disease Control. Also took the support of the University of Hawaii, Maui College. Most canoes are about 16 to 18 inches on the seats. Maria, could you take number 2? Bruce, number 3. The average person can fit in with no problem, but people who have obesity issues or wide girths and so on will find a problem to get in. And so I specifically made sure that the 3 canoes that I'm using for this particular application will be at least 2 to 4 inches wider to accommodate most people who will be able to get in and out of the canoe.
Anyone can show up and paddle with us. We give them some safety training and basics on how to paddle, and they go out with us every day if they want. It's a fun way to exercise. It's a way to just go out and kind of be at peace with the world and get the day started.
It's so soul-filling. You get to work hard with 6 people, get to enjoy time on the water, and it's virtually 100% quiet and tranquil.
The grant that we have from the Centers for Disease Control is a 2-year grant that will end in April. Together in a collaborative relationship and a strategic alliance with the Maui Canoe Club, they will continue this program for at least the next 3 to 5 years by having use of the canoes, and they will volunteer their time. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Rafi.
you. Thank you. Thank you. You're back. You're back with Dr. Rafi right here on Boritzer's Bio Briefings on Think Tech Hawaii Television. And we're discussing my obesity and diabetic prevention program, which we carried out on the island of Maui about 2 years ago as part of the Michelle Obama Centers for Disease Control Obesity Reduction Initiative. And what we were talking about was, one, the introduction of wide-bodied canoes that we designed, especially some of the lessons we learned. My initial intent was to use this as a demonstration, as a pilot project that we could bring back and use throughout the state of Hawaii. In a little while, I'll tell you about some of our plans right here for Hawaii. Now, what we found out was some very interesting things. The initial ideas that we designed the canoes around were based on our normal procedures at the Maui Canoe Club, where I was a kapena, a captain, and some of them, in reality, in practice, turned out to be slightly off the course. One of the ideas was, since we had people who were somewhat overweight, getting into a single canoe would prove to be a problem, because of the launching of canoes require that you do this fairly quickly. Everybody stands on the left side or on the ama side where the outrigger is, and push the canoes. As it comes into the water and the waters reach your knees, you jump into the canoe with your butt backwards, so to speak, so you land in the seat and start paddling furiously. Well, if you have weight issues, this kind of quick alacrity type of activity does not work, and often can result in the person actually losing hold of the canoe, and watch as the canoe and the outrigger part just go over their head and leave them behind. This obviously necessitates everybody going out somewhat, make sure that the wave doesn't turn them over as they return back and pick up the fallen paddler. So that's one of the early lessons that we learned. So we didn't want to lose exactly the paddlers that we had introduced to paddling, and we didn't want them to get frustrated and give up or feel endangered and perhaps endanger the canoe in the process. So what we did was we rigged two of the canoes together, and you will shortly see in the film, you will see that we rigged up a double, two singles and a double. The idea being that regular members of the club, and by the way, I want to mention when I say regular members, the program paid for everybody who was coming in under the program. This was a 3-year program, which the Maui Canoe Club had said they would continue even after the program ended, allowed anybody who lived on Maui to become a member of this program and participate as a full member. Once they finished 5 paddles, training paddles, they could become regular members of the club without paying the nominal, rather the normal fee of $125 per person or $200 per family, but for $1 they could become an annual member of the canoe club. Now this was a big incentive, because whether you know it or not, canoe clubs do cost money to operate. There's the equipment, there is the base, there are the people, the instructors that you have to hire occasionally, and so on. And these are not racing club. This was a fully recreational community club. So it was held together by different, perhaps, different motivations, so to speak. And when we offered this additional motivation, this seemed to be a very big hit. And I must tell you, the first year we did have 100 new members. So you can imagine also what revitalization, what this had, the effect it had on the canoe club itself. The canoe club itself, I think at the time that we started the program, already had 250 members. It is probably the only non-competitive canoe club in the state of Hawaii. So that was the first problem, make sure that we didn't lose the brand new recruits to the canoe club who were participating in the obesity and behavior modification program. We didn't lose them. So that was one of the first issue. Then another issue that we faced, although this was more true for racing clubs, is that people go to work during the day. Whether they're thin, obese, whether they are over-exercised, under-exercised, eat right or not, people usually are engaged in some activity that they are committed to during the daytime. So most racing clubs operate on the weekends and practice in the evenings after work. Now you can see that this could be a problem evening, that people have obligations. So many times you simply do not get the targeted population that you want for these kind of programs, because people already have their full day. So what we did, our race activities around the canoes were, it started at 7 o'clock in the morning. There used to be 3 sessions, 7, 8, and sometimes 9 or 8:30 and so on. So and there was a 6 o'clock paddle. We tried to make it available to as wide a population as possible, and it really worked out quite well. Everybody got instructions. Everybody was very, very supportive. The club itself was very supportive of the program, and we managed to really induce a lot of goodwill in the canoe club, which again gave me the impetus to try this thing and say, let's take it over to the rest of the states, especially to Oahu, and see if this can work on a wide scale. So the canoes were very, very important. Again, also the input of the canoe builders being very flexible. So the canoes had special area that was not normally found on OC6 outrigger canoes. They had a hole in the front of the bow for attaching a line, so if they had to be towed. They had places under the seat of the captain in the back and the stroker in front for first aid kits. They had life jackets underneath the seats, again, for emergencies. The canoe also, nobody had to bring their own paddles. The canoes came with paddles for every participant, so they would not have to go to the expense of purchasing their own paddle, which is usually common in most canoe clubs. So these were some of the issues that came about with the canoes. We learned that procedures are different and adapted to them as well. This was the canoe setup. But what we really liked was the fact that canoe clubs traditionally already have members, and all they have to do really is adapt or adopt a community social model. And this is the kind of model that we'll hope to be able to attach to an existing canoe club, bring the specialized canoes, because once people had already gotten the confidence to participate in the double canoes, they could then go with any canoes, whether the third one, which was, even though it was slightly wider, there was a single and required more agility and practice and confidence to participate in. What we had envisioned was that the clubs will actually be part of the community, be almost a community development project, where the social activity of the community, the sports behavior of the community, the communal eating and festivities, festival aspects could all be part of it. This was part of the original thinking in developing the canoe club as a hub, especially in areas of Hawaii where you have still community development issues that have not been fully realized. Specifically areas like the leeward coast of Oahu, areas on the North Shore, and perhaps areas on the east side of Oahu. I wanted to see what some of the results were of the paddling program. So why don't we run tape number 2.
Every Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, the Live Life Aloha Outrigger Canoe Paddling Program takes place on Maui's Kealia Beach. There is a sign-in and on-beach instruction before going out.
Up. Oh, also when you enter the blade in, because if not, it'll be off. Go ahead, push on. Okay, get in.
According to the State of Hawaii's Department of Health survey of the Live Life Aloha program, the average age of canoe paddling participants is 50 years of age. Gender is made up of 37% male and 63% female. The same survey shows 9% of the Live Life Aloha paddlers to be of healthy weight, 28% to be overweight, 47% to be obese, and 16% to be morbidly obese.
You're watching Boritzer's Bio Briefings. We are back talking about the Centers for Disease Control initiative in obesity reduction, prevention of inflammatory diseases and diabetes. And we're talking about some of the activities and some of the components of bringing in the healthy eating and exercise programs that we kind of integrated with each other and adapted to the Hawaiian realities. One of those things that we talked about, the community development aspect, and it's really very important. Canoe clubs emphasize some of the history of Native Hawaiian peoples, and why not attach some of the realities of every day, some of the issues that have come up. Obviously, the Hawaiian social and political life has changed quite radically from the way it was in the 19th century or even earlier. So we have to adapt to it. But one of the things that we can almost use an overlay on is some of the democratic processes that Hawaiians obviously live in the United States of America, in the state of Hawaii, with American and Western laws, but perhaps we can use some community development participatory activities, make the clubs themselves almost a local governance in terms of social mores, in terms of social activities, in terms of sports and so on. So we came up with a possible idea. We haven't tested it out. We're waiting to get some feedback on it also, where the canoe club itself becomes a membership organization for everybody who lives within the geographical area of the canoe club, getting to vote on the procedure, the processes that we have discussed, some of the activities, perhaps expansion of activities, but making it a social unit not a political unit, but a social unit where people can have an input in an aspect of their life that is normally they are not part of, because traditionally outrigger canoe clubs have been a racing organization. Perhaps they can adopt the social community involvement. And the other areas where some canoe clubs have some attached lands to their hale, and perhaps they can even learn to plant vegetables or be part of a program that raises some fresh foods and so on, as well as dispensing nutrients and nutritional foods within the canoe club atmosphere, whether it's juicing activities, fresh food, fresh vegetables eating, and so on. We'd incorporated as part of a new grant we're asking for to develop exactly some of these issues, and we hope that the appropriate funding agencies will look more favorably upon this kind of issue. One of the issues we're looking to also to do is to implement some of these programs in Oahu and measure their effects on longevity. Do all these things I'm talking about, do they actually have an effect on how long or what kind of life you're going to have as you age? And we've come up with some innovative solutions. I won't be talking about that today because I will leave that to my associate, Professor Richard Alsop, to talk about at another time, fairly soon, hopefully. And what I want to do is leave you now with one of the films on the dedication of the canoes in Maui 3 years ago. And Maestro, why don't you run the film? Until next week, this is Rafi Boritzer, Boritzer's Bio Briefings.